Good day to everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We will be looking at an overview of the new L1 Pro product family from Bose Professional. So again, thank you for joining us, and if you have any questions, please feel free to post your questions in the questions tab. We'll answer them as soon as we can, or as the presentation goes maybe. And I have a team standing by to also assist with answering any questions you have. Well, let's get started. So just to kick it off, maybe as a reminder, remember that Bose actually invented the portable line array category. And for the last 17 years, the L1 Pro has been, or the L1 series at least, has been a very good contender on that market. Bose wanted to solve the problem musicians and audiences were having with triple systems. Now, triple systems means you have a front of house PA, you have stage monitors, and then you still have backline amps, where musicians on stage were hearing something completely different to what the audience members were hearing. The design of L1 was such that you could place the L1 behind the musicians, so basically on stage behind the musicians, and the musicians could hear what was the intended sound of what they were playing, as each system amplified each individual musician. That in turn meant that the audience also heard the music as intended. So the industry scoffed at this, but Bose persisted, but put a touring band together and to prove that it worked, and people were blown away. It was successful because it worked. Unbelievable vocal clarity, amazing 180-degree room coverage, thanks to the articulated line arrays design that was placed into the L1 systems, and surprisingly, feedback resistant. So that meant that you could actually walk up with your microphone almost right up to the L1 with getting very, very little feedback, if any. With sound that can reach the edge of the room, all in a very portable package. And that was the original concept and design of the L1s. There's a bit of a visualization of what the L1 system projection would be. So the L1s had around 180-degree coverage horizontal, which meant if you had multiple systems behind the musicians, it would basically permeate into every corner of the room, and therefore mixing the audio coming out of each individual speaker. So the original L1 family consisted of the L1 Compact, the L1S, the one in the middle there, and then the L1 Model 2. Now, both the L1S and the L1 Model 2 could be used with either the B1 base module, as depicted in the middle there with the L1S, or it could be used with the B2 module that's depicted there next to the L1 Model 2 system on the right-hand side of the image. But now it's time for the next generation of L1 product family. So Bose created this next generation of L1s to remind the market that they invented the category and to reclaim any lost market share. While still the category leader, the goal was to improve the total user experience with better sound, more portability, improved aesthetics, and a very easy to use user interface. And we'll take a look at all of those features in just a moment. That all means that you have a total upgraded user experience. So, introducing the new L1 Pro product family. The designs have been further refined, showing a clear leap from the current L1 family. High level differences between each model of the L1 product family and their target user personas. So let's take a look at those. So there's just a basic overview of each of those. So let's take a look at the details. So the differences between legacy L1 systems and the new L1 Pro family. The L1 Pro 8, which is the first unit on the left-hand side there, features 8 drivers in the mid-high array versus 6 on the current L1 Compact. A larger subwoofer. It has about a 10 dB louder or overall loudness, or overall louder loudness, and it's also tuned lower. So a lower crossover offers better vocal clarity and instrument separation. It's full-featured multi-channel mixer that it also includes, and then Bluetooth and app control. The next one up is the L1 Pro 16. This unit features 16 drivers in the mid-high array versus 12 that was in the L1 Model 1S. Again, it's louder and lower, so more SPL and bigger bandwidth, or wider bandwidth. The form factor is a 3-piece carry and breakdown versus the L1S, which had a 4-piece if you were using the B1 module with it, or the B2 module. It has the same multi-channel mixer as the L1 Pro 8, and again with Bluetooth and app control. Lastly, the L1 Pro 32, well, obviously features 32 drivers in the mid-high array versus 24 that was in the L1 Model 2. So again, it's louder and lower, so more SPL and wider bandwidth. The form factor is 60% lighter than the L1 Model 2. So the columns are lighter and more narrower. And you'll notice the compact power stand at the bottom of the unit as well. And that's even made more portable. It also features the same multi-channel mixer as the L1 Pro and Pro 16, again with Bluetooth and app control. And now the Pro 32 can be paired with the new Sub 2 or Sub 1, and connection is even made easier with a single SubMatch cable to drive the subs. Just looking at the Sub 2, the units on the left-hand side there, unlike the B2 and B1 modules, these are powered subwoofers. So they do require their own power source from the mains power supply. So because of the power, they are very versatile. They have assignable crossovers for line input and outputs, polarity switching, cardioid mode when using 2 modules, and includes also a pole mount, so you can basically stack something like an S1, which we'll take a look at later, on top of for instance, the Sub 1 module. So it features the same 10-inch by 18-inch racetrack as the L1 Pro 16, but it is a more acoustically, or it has basically more acoustic volume. So it is even tuned to have a lower frequency response. And we'll take a little bit more detailed look at the Racetrack Drivers in a moment. So it's the most power and most bass response out of the new Pro range. It's ideal for mobile DJs and also full band applications. The Sub 1, the little unit on the right hand side there, that again is exactly the same as the Sub 2. So it's again an active sub, so it does require walls main power. Has again the same polarity inputs and output switching, or it's at least polarity switching, crossover, assignable crossover points for inputs and outputs, cardioid mode, etc., and also features the pole mount, as I mentioned earlier, for an additional speaker on top. Unlike the Sub 2 module, the Sub 1 has a 7-inch by 13-inch racetrack driver, and that is similar to the one that's in the L1 Pro 8, but again, it has a larger acoustic volume, so it has a lower frequency response as well. Now, both these units, again, have been made more portable, and again, the Sub 1 is the more portable one of the 2 subs, featuring quite a good bass response, and it's basically best for singer-songwriter combinations, duos, trio applications, where you don't necessarily need massive high energy. There's no kicks, drums and things may be included in that as well. So there is an overview of all the units, and just highlighting the base units in them. So you can see the Sub 1 and L1 Pro, as we mentioned, has the 7x13-inch racetrack driver, and the Pro 16 and Sub 2 has the 10x18 racetrack driver. So let's take a look at what that racetrack drivers are. The racetrack driver utilizes roughly the same speaker cone surface area as a comparable system, but it is narrower and taller and allows it to be put in a slimmer, slightly taller enclosure, resulting in a better center of gravity and a much easier to carry experience. It takes up less space in your vehicle and on stage. And there you can see a depiction of the 7x13-inch racetrack drivers and how they are placed into the enclosure. And if you look carefully on the right-hand side, you'll see the oval shape of the racetrack driver in the L1 Pro 16 model depicted there on screen. There you go. So all three of the L1 Pro systems feature the same I/O panel on the back. So the onboard mixer, if you look from left to right, is the Pro 8, Pro 16 in the middle, and then the Pro 32 on the right-hand side. So again, same functionality, same number of inputs, same flexibility on all three systems. So there's no compromise in terms of the input and output capability of the system and some of the additional features that's built into these new generation of L1s. So the Pro 8 and Pro 16 I/O panels, as you can see on the back here, they have a familiar mental mode of what a mixer should look like, but it is a leap forward. It's simplified and it's intuitive. The three rotary encoders at the top are also push buttons. So the user can push to select a parameter, so for instance, volume, treble, bass, or reverb, and then adjust that parameter by turning the button accordingly to the right or to the left. The LED ring around the encoder tells the user what settings are in use. So also on the back of the unit, you'll see there's, or at least at the top of the button, it'll tell you volume, bass, treble, reverberation, whatever the case is. Every time you press the button, it'll cycle through one of those three. But there's more features packed into this, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment as well. Maybe some additional features there. The combo jack, which is a XLR and jack input. So you can have either an instrument or a microphone cable connected to each of the two inputs. We'll take a little bit more detail look at the Bluetooth streaming and the aux input as well in a moment. There's again selectable system EQs, and then there's a USB service port for any firmware updates and things that might be required in future. And then another big feature that is now included on the L1 Pro series is the ability to turn on and off phantom power for the two mic inputs. So now you can also use your condenser style microphone or again condenser type microphone directly onto the inputs on the system. As I mentioned earlier, there's also a full bandwidth line output port, and on the subs you would basically receive that full line uncrossover inputs, and then on the sub you can actually turn that crossover on or off. That's just a top-down view of the L1 Pro 32 I/O input or I/O panel, and you can see basically it's laid out exactly the same as the Pro 8 and the Pro 16. Next up is Bluetooth control. So let's have a look at those features. So the Bluetooth on the system features audio streaming or AAC. AAC is a codec that allows for small size Bluetooth packets of info that contains more information than just necessarily the audio information to be delivered to or from devices, to be delivered from a device to the L1 Pro. So that could be from your phone to the L1, from your tablet to the L1, from your PC to the L1, for instance. So this means a higher quality audio and a better experience to the critical listener. Again, we mentioned there's also no app control on the system. So the Bluetooth also allows for the app-based mixer control, which is a low energy connection for the exchange of data between the tablet and the L1 unit. So let's look at the app control. And as I mentioned, that's a low energy connection between the Bose L1 unit and your application. The L1 Mix is the new system that is part of the app control on the unit. So if you go into your App Store, you can find the L1 Mix application for the Pro family of products. It is basically a complete channel level control of the L1 Pro 8, Pro 16, and Pro 32. It duplicates essentially the I/O panel on the back. It allows you to control all the parameters while you're performing without needing to actually interrupt the performance or having to walk over to the unit and adjust anything directly on the system itself. And it allows DJs the opportunity to adjust parameters of L1 while walking around the room, venue, to explore and set up the system and tune it maybe a little bit and get some EQ and things going. And that again results in an optimized user experience without having to walk back to the product up and down and so on. Then it also allows for a dedicated person to make parameter adjustments in the crowds or off stage, should that be required. So again, nobody actually has to walk up to the units and make adjustments on the device itself. So on the left-hand side is the panel on the I/O panel on the back of an L1 Pro 8 or a Pro 16. And on the right-hand side is the actual application running off a phone or a tablet, whatever the case may be. So the L1 Mix is the product's I/O panel in your pocket, essentially. Other than a physical connection to instruments, mics, line sources, etc., there is nothing you cannot do to control or control-wise on the product that you couldn't do on the L1 Mix app. So whatever you can do on the back panel, apart from your physical hard connections, you can do that on the L1 Mix app as well. The main dashboard was designed to mimic the product's user interface, so there is no learning curve. There's no difference between the two layouts. In this example, when users select the parameter they want to adjust in the L1 Mix app, they can see the selection in real time on the actual application, or sorry, from the application, they can see it real time happening on the back of the I/O panel itself. When users increase or decrease a parameter value, in the case of volume, for instance, on the application, they can see the LED ring increase or decrease accordingly in real time. So you can see there shown the volume on the unit itself is exactly the same as what it is on the L1 Mix app. Channel mutes also engage in real time. So again, there's no delay, there's no real latency. Once you press the mute on the application, on your phone, your tablet, PC, whatever the case is, it mutes it directly and almost instantly on the product itself. Some added advantages that the L1 Mix offers. It also has the functionality now to save scenes. So a user who plays a regular venue, they can basically set up their scene, set up their mix the way they want it, set up the inputs and EQs and so on, and they can then set that as a scene. They can name it, and simply next time they get to that same venue and they play that same venue again, they can basically just recall that scene straight off of the app, and it will basically load all the features back onto the unit, or activate all the features that you had at your last session or your last gig at that venue. From the L1 Mix app, you also have access to your phantom power to turn that on and off for your condenser mics, as I mentioned earlier. and there's some additional settings and things that you can do there as well. So if you want to access the phantom power, you basically go to settings and activate it from there. Perhaps the most feature or the most powerful feature of the L1 mix is the access to the library of the custom tone match presets. So for tone or for L1 users in the past that used the tone match, the original tone match module, for instance, or the T4S and the T8S mixes, that same powerful library of presets for different mics, different guitars, different instruments are available directly off of the application as well, and you can recall those as you need to. So in this case, for instance, you can select an Audix mic there by the looks of it, and you can select which of the Audix mics you want. As I mentioned, there's also the ability to select instruments. So in this case, you could select Taylor guitars, and you can select the specific Taylor guitar that you use, for instance, and recall that pre-EQ from the library and run it on that input. So again, it's switchable between input 1 and input 2 separately. So it's not mixed or matched or duplicated across the two inputs. So both channels have their own library that they can recall. So let's look at SubMatch. SubMatch is a patented streamlined connection that allows users to connect a sub 1 or a sub 2 powered bass module to an L1 Pro 32 or any other system that you would like to as well. You can use the sub 1 or the sub 2 module on. But when you use the SubMatch cable on the L1 Pro 32, it basically allows for a single cable connection that provides both power and digital audio from the L1 Pro 32 bass module directly to the sub, like I mentioned, through that single cable connection. There's just a bit of an indication or a picture of an L1 Pro 32 connected to an L1 sub. And because the sub 1 and sub 2 are powered, they need obviously voltage from a wall outlet, but Bose wanted to duplicate the simple setup of the L1 with the B1 and B2, where there was a single cable connection between the two units, as those were passive boxes. So they've duplicated that setup. In this case, your power and digital audio are transmitted through that single connection between the two devices. The SubMatch cable is a robust 12-gauge cable with a locking collar and proprietary connection or proprietary connector. The SubMatch cable comes packaged with the L1 Pro 32, and users can link a second sub 1 or sub 2 with another SubMatch cable, which you can also purchase separately. So if you purchase 2 sub 1s or 2 sub 2 modules, then you can connect both of them to your system by just using the loop through output. So also to make things easy, behind the little sliding door, you'll see there's a little white sliding door there that you can use. That's right. That little white sliding door allows you to switch between using the SubMatch cable or then using a proprietary IEC connector to power the sub module. So because, as I mentioned, the sub 1 and sub 2 are active subs or powered subs, they obviously have a lot more versatility and a lot more functionality or at least areas that you can use them in. So there's a couple of built-in features, additional features that enhances the sub 1 and sub 2 experience as well. As I mentioned earlier, they feature an assignable crossover on input and output, and then cardioid mode. But we'll look at that in just a moment. So this is a panel, or this is a view of the I/O panel of the sub 1 and sub 2. And as I mentioned, the line input and line output both have a crossover point that can be activated so that you can use the unit with a separate PA system, or say an S1, for instance, activate this crossover and just run your cable from the S1 back down to the sub. That allows you to tune the sub a little bit better. And then lastly, again, it's also upgradable via USB-C ports on the back of the unit. As I mentioned earlier, there's also polarity and cardioid mode settings that you can set up directly from the back panel. And then lastly, there's an adjustable volume control, so you can increase or decrease your relative bass level for your PA system. Talking about using double subs or using them in cardioid mode, when using sub 1 or sub 2 bass modules, they have keyed stacking feature that allows them to be stacked facing the same direction, or with the bottom unit rear facing in order to access cardioid mode. They can only be stacked in these two ways, so they can't be stacked upright, if you want to call it like that. And the keyed stacking is secure. So once you put the two units on top of each other, they basically lock in. And then, as we mentioned, the cardioid or directional bass mode, when you turn one of the subs around, as shown at the bottom there, will also then allow you to stack the two units on top of each other and lock them in place. And then the user would basically just go onto the back of the unit and press and hold the polarity or cardioid button for 4 seconds to activate cardioid mode for the rear facing sub. So the top facing sub stays the same, but the rear facing sub needs to be placed into cardioid mode, and this activates the DSP to bring cardioid mode to life on the system. And there you can see the button for that, as we mentioned earlier. So let's talk a little bit about cardioid mode. Low frequencies emitted by a subwoofer are omnidirectional. This means that users will hear about the same thing standing behind a sub as they would hear standing in the front of the sub. This often means unwanted low frequencies feedback on stage or disrupting the neighbors during an outdoor event, for instance. When cardioid mode is engaged and units are in cardioid position, the rear firing base energy is negated by approximately 10 dBs, which is quite a bit. And low frequency is then directed to the front of the system. The cardioid is a pro audio trend that's been around for quite some time, and lots of house engineers use them these days to set up their bass arrays. And Bose is making this available, or this trending setup available, really easy to access, and as a new feature on the L1 Pro systems to greatly increase their features available. As I mentioned there on the left-hand side, you can see if you have 1 or 2 subs just stacked on top of each other, it's basically omnidirectional and your energy goes everywhere. And with a cardioid mode engaged, you basically have your energy pointed towards the front of the system, and it helps negate some of the energy at the back. Lastly, as we mentioned, on the sub 1 and sub 2, there's also now a pole mount available for it. And for this, we can use it, as I mentioned earlier, perhaps with an S1. So you can use a sub 1 with an S1, and they've actually the sub 1's actually been tuned to work very well with the S1 as well. So that's a nice combo to enhance your low frequency response from your S1 system. And that makes a very great micro PA, or great sounding micro PA system. That's again very portable and easy to use. Lastly, a couple of additional accessories. So again, like with the L1 systems, the L1 Pro systems have multiple different bags and options to carry them in. So there is an L1 Pro 8 system bag, which houses your subwoofer main module plus your extenders or your extension units, and then your actual 8 speakers in that array. So it breaks up into 3 pieces and basically goes into the sub or the system bag at least. The L1 Pro 16 similarly, the system breaks up in 3 pieces with your 2 extenders being stacked on top of the unit. They basically come apart and go into the bag with the base module and the base power module basically. And then you can see on that picture also that the L116 is actually a roller bag. So because it's a little bit heavier, again, it makes it a little bit easier to just tip it over and actually just wheel it to where you need to go. The L1 Pro system basically has a bag for the array and a separate bag for the power stand, similarly to what the L1 Model 1S and Model 2 units were. Lastly, there's a sub 1 roller bag and also a sub 2 roller bag. So there's also 2 bags available for those. And then if you don't require the roller bags or the carry bags, in that case, you can also use an L1 Pro 8 slipcover or an L1 Pro 16 slipcover, which basically just covers over the sub. As I mentioned, the SubMatch cable is available to be purchased separately as well. Should you need an additional sub and an additional SubMatch cable. And then lastly, there's a threaded adjustable pole, speaker pole units available as well, which then basically screws in on the sub 1 or sub 2 modules. And then you can place your standard top hat size speaker on top of that. So these accessories are all sold separately to the system. Okay. That about brings us to the end of the presentation. I'm just checking out on the questions. Yeah, a good question here. Can you connect an external mixer to the speakers? Well, definitely. So if you were, for instance, using a larger 16 or 32 channel mixer, digital or analog, doesn't matter. You basically just run your analog signal like you would normally run out of your mixer or out of your stage box, whatever the case might be, directly to either input 1 or input 2. And you can then basically just bypass any of your settings on the onboard DSP mixer on the L1 module. So you just make sure that your treble, bass, everything is set to middle, so you're not increasing or decreasing any of that. And again, in a typical stereo or conventional way of setting up, you can use 2 L1 Pro 16s, Pro 8s, Pro 32s, put one left of stage, one right of stage, and you could still have a normal, what we refer to as a normal setup. So like I mentioned, run input left or output left of your mixer to the left stack and output right to the right stack, and have a normal stereo setup. You could also individually, if you were using multiple units, for instance, just talking about the concept of it, if you would still want to use the L1s behind your band members, but still control the mix, again, you can set up a multi-mix output and just route different signals to different L1 units, should that be a requirement from the band or from the engineer, whatever the case may be. Okay, I think that that about covers our presentation for today. So again, just thank you for joining us. If you want to see any further information or have any sort of more content and more training, you're welcome to have a look at the pro.bose.com website. There is a link there to their education center. On that education center, you can just sign in, register for it, and you can then view any of their webinars and content available that they have on there. In addition to that, on our AlphaTech webpage, we also have a link there in the top to the training tab. And from there, you can also access this webinar and any of the other webinars that we've done in the past as well. Like always, if you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with us, contact our technical team, contact your sales representative, We are here to help and standing by to hear from you guys. And we hope you enjoyed today's presentation. Again, any more information, costs, you want to know what the systems cost, please get in touch with your sales rep, send us an email. In addition, our price list is actually also on our website. So again, go to alpha-tech.co.za and just click on prices, and you can download the prices from there as well. Perfect. Well, thank you, everybody, and hope to see you on the next one. Have a good day. Bye.